For years, Alexandra Chin was underestimated within her own house. Reserved by nature and strategist by conviction, she had decided to keep secretly his identity professional, even in front of James, his own husband. While he believed he was supporting a wife without ambition, Alexandra directed Reynolds Technologies, one of the most influential companies, quietly of the technology sector. Its name was behind the patents, the strategic decisions of the key market movements. Ironically, and James, along with his executive friends, executed orders without whose idea the really gave. For his social circle, Alexandra was nothing more than a figurehead in the events, a woman who understood nothing about the real world. They laughed, she listened, and all the while, she planned. The night of the dinner marked a before and a afterwards. James had invited several management colleagues to his house, loud, vain, and comfortably settled men, the habit of making fun, especially of women. As the wine flowed, they began the comments. First as jokes, hints about how she continued unemployed, about her supposed lack of ability to find something decent. Alexandra didn't respond. She watched. When James blurted out that, even the company's intern knew more about business than his own wife, the table exploded in laughter. Nobody over there, I imagined that. Days before, Alexandra had already gathered documents confidential, requested internal audits, and prepared a detailed operation to dismantle each of them. The clock of the fall had started running, and the first second already had sounded. Up to date next, Alexandra arrived early to Reynolds Technologies headquarters, dressed like everyone else. No designer suits, neither attendees following her. He passed through the reception with a discreet portfolio, pretending to be just another candidate for a fictitious vacancy that there was created. Internal. Strategy analyst. Nobody the recognized. Not in that context. The goal was clear, to experience from the inside how a seemingly unconnected woman was treated within a corporate culture built by men like James. What she found was not surprised, but the enraged, sexist comments, condescension, invasive questions in the mock interview. One of the interviewers he said that the company did not need more women, sensitive, but people who can withstand pressure. Everything was being engraving. Meanwhile, in another room, the legal team that Alexandra had secretly formed already began to execute the first steps of the plan. Classified documents, compromised emails, systematically ignored employee reports. Everything was lined up. Each of the parts had been put with precision surgical. Alexandra was not just seeking personal justice, but a complete restructuring of a system that had become rotten from within. I knew that if I acted firmly, I would not only clean your company-owned corruption, but would give voice to those who had been silenced for years. What was coming wasn't just a confrontation, it was a purge. At 11 a.m., tomorrow, Alexandra called a meeting extraordinary with the Reynolds Board of Trustees. The application. It was digitally signed by A. Chin, a name that few have seen clearly, despite being printed in all of the company's founding documents. You're confused. Some members said it was a mistake. Others, more attentive, we will begin to connect the points. When he entered the main directorate room, without a Shamativa outfit, with a simple blazer and a visitor's appearance, he still spent no time fishing, he didn't even notice. James was among those present. Arqueou as sobrancelhas, como se aquilo fosse uma piada. Alexandra went to the center of the room, connected her notebook to the projector and just said, "You need to make sure that everyone pays enough attention." The first images that will appear on the web are prints of internal conversations between executives. Next, videos recorded in the company's own offices, where offensive tweets and misogynistic comments flowed naturally. Afterwards, we saw the manipulated financial data, the overinflated contracts, the emails omitting complaints from officials, and the records of diversion of verbs in public projects. Alexandra did not narrate with Riva, not with theatricality. We barely presented the facts, one by one, with clarity and surgical complexity. At the end of the presentation, I opened an envelope and read an official letter from the founder and CEO of the company, herself, requesting the immediate dismissal of James Morrison, Stephen Grant, Paul Denvers, and more than 3 names directly linked to the internal schemes. The silence that filled the room was absolute. For the first time in years, Alexandra did not need to hide. James didn't react immediately. For a few seconds, he looked as if he didn't understand what had just happened. Then he tried laugh. "This is a joke, right?" he muttered, looking around for support, but no one dared to defend him. Alexandra didn't deflect the look. He let the silence make his work. When one of the members of the advice confirmed that the documentation was authentic and that the legal power belonged from the founding of the company, James paled. He had never considered that his wife, that the same one I ignored at home, which he called useless, in public, outside the architect of the whole world corporate ecosystem that he felt part of owner. And now, that world is gone. Collapsed like a house of cards. The layoffs were effective at the end of that same afternoon. Each received the formal notification, along with citations judicial that already had been processed with advance notice. The offices were evacuated without scandal, but with a weight that was felt in the air. Some employees applauded discreetly. Others, who had been victims from the toxic environment for years, looked at Alexandra with a mixture of awe and gratitude. She didn't smile. There was no satisfaction in his gestures, just a silent determination. I knew this was just the start. Cleaning Structural did not end with the departure of 6 men. An entire culture had to be rebuilt from the ground up, and that it was going to hurt. But this time, she didn't think hide. That night, Alexandra didn't come home. She stayed in a meeting room empty, reviewing reports and reorganizing teams that had been displaced for years. Unlike other times, I didn't need to pretend I didn't understand what was passing by. The employees who were entering they called her Mrs. Chin, with, "I respect genuine." Some, they brought folders, others just came up to tell him, "Thank you." I wasn't a heroine in the romantic sense. He was someone who had supported in silence, that there was collected parts while others destroyed. For the first time in a lot. Time. She didn't feel she should apologize for being who she was. There was only one certainty inside her. She would never let her intelligence was treated as a threat. James tried call her several times that night. Voice messages, emails, even flowers were sent to the office. But Alexandra didn't respond. Not because she didn't feel anything, because she felt everything, but because I understood that if I opened the door, not even 1 centimeter, everything could fall apart again. He didn't want to apologize. I wanted to get the control, and she had already lived long enough to recognize the difference. In his place, contacted with the legal department and authorized the initiation of lawsuits for internal fraud, institutional harassment, and embezzlement. The processes already. They were ready. All that was missing was his signature. He signed it without trembling. At dawn, the news already was in all the media of the sector. An anonymous CEO had uncovered one of the older people corporate scandals of the year. But what was most striking the attention was not just the level of corruption, but the fact that everything had been discovered by the founder herself, who had been hidden for years even from her closest circle. Some articles they painted her as a silent genius, others as a woman cold and calculating. Alexandra didn't respond to any press request. I knew I shouldn't explain herself to those who never asked about her when it was invisible. His focus was within the company, among the people who really needed someone gave a step forward. Meanwhile, James was losing allies at an absurd rate. Those who had once they called for every decision, they started blocking his number. His accounts were frozen as a preventive measure, and several personal contracts were audited by court order. What most it hurt, however, it was silence. Friends before you read at festivals and jingles, now we pretend that he never existed. To her, who had been, one of the only people to defend her youth, she sent a direct email. You are not the victim of this story. You only know that she would never have the courage to tell. James read it 3 times before attacking the cell phone on the wall. Within Reynolds, the transformations were immediate. Alexandra initiated an internal review of all departments, starting with human resources, which for years had silenced complaints and normalized abusive behavior. They opened anonymous reporting. Channels were restructured leaderships and were eliminated bureaucratic processes that protected those at the top and stifled those below. What was once a company feared for its culture of constant pressure now was beginning to transform in a space for listening, inclusion, and transparency. It was not simple. There was resistance. Some senior officials resigned on their own initiative. Others were accompanied to the exit. But for the first time, the employees they felt that someone really liked them. I saw. One of the most symbolic moments occurred one afternoon when Alexandra called Mariana, an analyst who had been stuck for 5 years for refusing to participate in dynamics social with their bosses. Alexandra does not knew personally, but there was read all the reports on your performance impeccable. When you offered the position of innovation manager, Mariana cried, not out of ambition, but out of relief. I thought I would never get out of that. Corner, he said. Alexandra did not respond with motivational phrases nor heroic speeches, only passed the contract and said, sign it if you think this place is still worth it. Mariana signed without dude. Outside the company, the consequences legal were advancing with force. The prosecutor's office there was accepted the complaint filed by Alexandra and her team, and the case became increasingly publicized. Links were discovered between some of the former executives and manipulated. Public contracts, along with unfair payments to ghost consultancies that only served to launder money. As they advanced, more employees were encouraged to testify. What had previously been whispered in hallways now was recorded in proceedings officers. James attempted to file a counterclaim for damage to his image, but it was dismissed in less than a week. It had no backing. It had no evidence. And above all, I had no credibility. On social networks, some they tried to discredit Alexandra, saying that she had taken revenge on her ex using his power. But every attempt at defamation was neutralized by the own employees of the company, who told their experiences and explained as things were changing since his return. Alexandra did not participate in those kinds of discussions. She kept with your daily routine, meetings, reviews, mentoring. There were past years of enduring attacks in silence. Now I preferred him to speak his work. The personal was left aside. I didn't seek to be a symbol. I just wanted to repair, rebuild, and show that the leadership also could come of the respect and the coherence. One morning, weeks later of the scandal, Alexandra walked along one of the hallways from the second floor when he crossed with Lucas, a designer junior who had been working for months silently, always ignored by his former superiors. Seeing her, he stopped a second and just said, "Thank you for not forgetting us." It was a simple phrase, but was left resonating all over the day, because in his background, that had always been his greatest fear, that the system would end up anesthetizing her, converting her in one more of those who looked the other way. But no. Every decision I had made up to that point was a reminder that it was still possible to do differently, and that, thank you, small, direct, was more valuable than any award or article in magazines. James, for his part, had hit rock bottom. After losing contracts, accounts, and social support, he ended up accepting a temporary position in a technology store in the outskirts of the city. There, ironically, he was to sell products designed by the same company as him there was help to corrupt. Some clients, they recognized him. Others just saw another salesman, tired, with his gaze lost. During one of those shifts, he received an official notification. Alexandra had formally requested the divorce, and the separation of property already was being executed based on the behavioral tests improper. He signed without red, not for dignity, but because I no longer had energy to fight. I had lost it, and knew. The internal overhaul of Reynolds Technologies not only affected people, but also the complete structure of the company. Unnecessary committees were eliminated, and the decisions and were offered spaces real development professional. Alexandra implemented a mentoring program led by women and professionals, underrepresented and allocated part of the annual budget for projects social and technological focused on digital inclusion. It was a new company, without to be so. And although the road was long, the results began to be noticed. Greater productivity, lower staff turnover, and an environment in which, for the first time, many felt like they could breathe. Alexandra walked through the hallways and was no longer invisible. He was present. He was a reference. One afternoon, while reviewed some reports, received a handwritten letter. It came no sender, but the line was unmistakable. It was James's mother as, the woman, with who Alexandra never had a relationship with close, you asked sorry. He said he had raised his son to be strong, but not fair. That he had seen signs, but they had ignored because so were the successful men. At the end of the letter, he said, I don't expect you to answer me. I just want to tell you that I regret not having been an ally when you needed it most, Alexandra saved the letter in a wooden box along with other symbolic objects. It was not forgiveness what I was looking for. It was true. And that letter, in a way, closed a cycle that was taking years open. The day it was officially completed divorce, Alexandra did not celebrate. There was no toast, nor trip, nor post on social media. He just went to his apartment, took off the shoes, left the cell phone on silent, and sat in front of the window with a cup of tea. He watched the sky for several minutes, without thinking about anything specific. She was a free woman. Yes, but not because of paper, it said. I was free because I no longer had to hide who I was. Because I had faced the storm with the eyes open and feet firm. Because he had chosen the true, although hurt. And in that silence, without applause, without witnesses, Alexandra allowed herself cry, not from sadness, from relief. In the following months, he received several proposals for giving lectures, writing books, even to star in documentaries about leadership feminine. Rejected almost all of them. He only agreed to one talk university, in a public institution where she once studied with a scholarship. There, in front of an audience full of young people, said something that stayed recorded in many. Power is not given to you by your position. It is given to you by your ability to stay true to yourself. When everyone underestimates you, it wasn't a prepared line. It came out of the soul. Because in the end, Alexandra had not just defeated James or his corrupt team. She had defeated something much deeper, the fear of being seen completely. At the end of that same year, Alexandra organized an internal event at Reynolds to present the new company values. He didn't hire celebrities, nor sought press. The event was for employees only, with microphone open and spaces so that everyone could speak, give opinions, suggest. One by one, workers who were carrying years without voice, they shared stories, criticisms, proposals. There were tears, hugs, awkward silences. But above all, there was true. Alexandra heard everything, without interrupt. When you touched speak, he didn't give long speeches. He just said, "This is yours, I just opened the door." And that phrase, more than any marketing slogan, became in he new mantra of the company. Meanwhile, James disappeared. From the media radar, he lived in a small, rented apartment, far away from the center, without social networks, without friends, without family. I had tried to remake his image, but none company it wanted to be close. On one occasion, he tried to contact one of the former colleagues to ask him a favor. He didn't get it answer. They blocked it. They avoided it. Alexandra never did it again. He saw again. He didn't need to do it. For her, the history with James, it didn't end in the room of the advice, neither in he judged. Ended he stopped looking for explanations for the damage that he had caused. Sometimes, the elderly justice isn't about punishing. It's about moving forward, despite everything. With he passed of the time, Alexandra began to recover things that she had forgotten that liked, reading for pleasure, walking without course, cook for her same without being aware of schedules or expectations foreign. Rediscovered his voice in spaces small, in everyday decisions, in conversations without a filter. I no longer had to act, nor adapt to the version that others they wanted her. She was the owner of her time, of your name, of his history. Some days were tougher than others, especially when they arrived memories of moments in those who had felt humiliated. But even those days, they had a new meaning. They were proof that he had survived and that he was building something better. One of the deeper changes were in his way of leading. He stopped attending meetings formal unnecessary and began to visit open offices, to sit with small teams, to listen without a filter. Alexandra knew that her elderly mistake had been to let the disconnect from their own creation. I would no longer allow that would happen. Now, every decision was made with the human impact on the center. Not everyone understood that transformation. Some traditional investors were uneasy, but the results were there. More innovation, more commitment, less turnover. What Alexandra had fact was not just a cleanup. It was a quiet revolution. And I didn't think stop it. One day anyone, while reviewed mail in her office, Alexandra received an unexpected message. It was from Carla, a former college classmate, with the one I had lost contact with more than a decade ago. The email was brief, but direct. Always I knew you were going to do something big. I just wanted to tell you that you did it, and that you made your way. Alexandra stayed reading that line in silence, not out of nostalgia, but because remembered something essential. She was not alone. There was many others women, many others professionals, fighting against unjust structures, silently carrying the burden, the same rage, the same frustration, the same desire for change, and knowing that your history could inspire, although out to a single person, already worth the penalty. That same day, when leaving of the building, Alexandra stopped in front of Reynolds's facade. She had seen it 1,000 times, but now the felt different. Already it was not a wall cold. It was no longer a symbolic prison. It was a place in reconstruction, just like her. He took a deep breath, as if finally could fill the lungs without feeling the weight of deception, of silence, of fear. In her bag, she carried a notebook where she had begun to write ideas for a new inclusive leadership program. Didn't had told anyone, I didn't had announced. I only knew that if I wanted something to change there outside, first I had to keep changing inside. And in that was... Weeks later, during an informal meeting with part of the innovation team, someone new asked Alexandra what she had learned most from everything she had experienced. She was silent for a few seconds. He looked his cup of coffee and replied, no frills. It's not about proving anything to anyone. It's about not betraying yourself. Nobody applauded, nor did a heroic comment. They only settled with the head. Because in that room, everyone knew what it cost. Stand firm when the environment is pressuring you to dilute yourself. Alexandra wasn't there to give a lecture. I was there because he had survived. And that, in itself, it was already a form of leadership. With the closing of the fiscal year, Reynolds filed the best results in a decade, but the most talked about were not the numbers, but the internal culture. External consultants began to study the Chin model, as they called some, a mix of silent strategy, empathetic leadership, and zero tolerance for corruption. For many, Alexandra had become the example. For her, it continued being simply a woman who, a day, he grew tired of keeping quiet. And although he was not looking for recognition, I knew that every step I took, every space I opened, could facilitate the path for others. That it was enough. 1 year after of the day when everything changed, Alexandra arrived early to the office. It was a quiet day, no events, no cameras, without tight schedules. He walked through the hallways with the same calm as always, greeting his name of every person he met. When he got to his office, he found a small box above his desk. There was no return address. When she opened it, she found an anonymous note that read, "Thank you for showing that you don't have to shout to have power. Sometimes, you just have to not give up." Inside was a small origami, phoenix. Alexandra didn't need to know who there was left. He smiled, placed in a shelf, and continued with his day. There was no applause, nor medals, nor cinematic endings. just a woman who decided to never be invisible again. A woman who understood that her greater power was not there in the position he held, but in his ability to say enough. Alexandra didn't need revenge, nor validation. What I had achieved was going much further. He had recovered his voice, his space, your history. And from that place, firm, real, one with scars, continued walking. Because, at the end of the day, what really matters is not what you achieve, but what you refuse to lose in He Path.